5:18 a.m., Columbus, Ohio. A place of worship turned into a trafficking site. A husband and wife pastoral couple. 2,610 refugee and orphan children missing. Hundreds of millions of dollars unaccounted for. Want to know the whole truth? Hit like and I will show you. Columbus, Ohio. The city still rested beneath the cold breath of the ocean wind. One by one, a convoy of black federal SUVs came to a silent stop outside the headquarters of a faith-based youth outreach ministry. Within seconds, more than 40 FBI and DEA agents moved forward with a clear and deliberate objective. The private office belonging to the organization's spiritual leaders, Pastor Yusuf Karim Warsame, 56, a Somali minister long praised for compassion and moral guidance, and his wife, Reverend Amina Halimo Duale, 53, who served as senior program director within the same network. Together, they had spoken at over 15 national faith conferences, appeared in 6 international humanitarian forums, and their ministry claimed to provide support, mentorship, and moral protection for more than 12,000 migrant and international students across multiple regions. Newspapers called them shepherds of the vulnerable. Donors repeated a single powerful phrase: they hold the future of thousands in their hands. But behind the sermons, awards, and applause, something no longer aligned. When federal analysts reviewed internal ministry records, a disturbing pattern emerged. Investigators traced 2,118 missing students and youth registrants once listed under faith exchange programs tied to the couple's international outreach routes. Many were recorded as participants in spiritual learning delegations, yet no return records existed. Over 5 years, the ministry reported annual revenues exceeding $240 million, while financial statements shifted repeatedly without explanation. Travel logs revealed recurring private sea and charter routes, not to community shelters or service centers, but to remote, lightly monitored departure ports across the Pacific. To the public, they were statistics. To federal investigators, they were warning bells, because what many believed to be charity now appeared to be a legacy built on a truth far darker than faith was ever meant to conceal. As investigators moved deeper into the records, admiration gave way to silence. For years, supporters had described the ministry of Pastor Mahad Warsame and his wife, Minister Layla Duale, as disciplined, structured, and flawlessly organized. But that discipline concealed a second reality, one analysts would later define as a charitable image protecting a mechanized system of human transfer. Internal audits documented $289 million in faith relief funding processed over 5 years. Yet more than 40% of those allocations were routed into programs that existed only on paper. No staff rosters, no physical offices, no verified student attendance. The reports looked complete. The lives behind them did not. Out of 3,240 youth listed across ministry exchange programs, at least 2,610 had no supporting identification records. Their medical clearances were suspended. In multiple cases, their profiles vanished entirely, removed from oversight as if their presence had never been recorded. Travel records repeated the same silent rhythm. Night-hour departures, the same maritime brokers, the same restricted coastal boarding points. Each group was transferred aboard chartered vessels registered to layered offshore entities, and every manifest listed them as youth spiritual learning delegates. But the routes did not end at aid centers. They ended at undisclosed ports in Southeast Asia. A separate intelligence review linked encrypted ministry correspondence to individuals under prior investigation for forced labor logistics. Transportation corridors overlapped, intentionally, not coincidentally. Projected movement count, 462 youth. Distribution nodes, unregistered private institutions overseas. Estimated illicit financial return, multi-billion scale. When every file, approval trail, and routing document was reconciled, there was no longer a question to ask. This was not ministry outreach. It was not administrative error. It was a system built carefully, quietly, and protected by trust. 4:41 a.m. The city streets surrounding the Faith Renewal Ministries campus were still wrapped in the darkness of dawn. The street lamps glowed faintly across the courtyard, and the quiet breeze moved through the trees as if the morning had not yet begun. For years, this compound had been described as a refuge, a place of prayer, youth guidance, and moral service led by Pastor Yusuf Warsame and his wife, Reverend Amina Duale. But that morning, silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. From 3 separate entry points, federal vehicles moved into position, unmarked SUVs, mobile tactical units, and child protection medical teams. More more than 120 agents from the FBI and DEA advanced with a single objective: stop the transfers before anyone disappeared. The ministry's administrative hall was the first point of entry. The lobby walls were lined with framed photographs, youth gatherings, mission trips, community events. But when agents reached the interior corridor, they found a sealed underground access door labeled Storage Annex. It was not storage. Inside were 4 partitioned rooms, foldable cots, intake forms, and numbered wristbands. Lists were taped beside each doorway, many names repeated, several documented as departed, with no return record filed. Across the courtyard, a second team moved toward the fellowship dormitory. Key logs showed 63 active occupants. University housing databases listed only 21. The remaining 42 names existed under a single classification: faith immersion relocation. There was no documentation of guardianship, no academic enrollment, no re-entry verification. Resistance did not come in chaos, it came in order. Security staff attempted to restrict movement, citing religious confidentiality. Doors were locked, files were withheld, instructions were relayed quietly through internal radios as if a silent system had been rehearsed. But room by room, the illusion fractured. On the upper floor, agents recovered 12 encrypted devices, transport documents, and routing approvals repeated across multiple months. The same dates, the same names, the same departure windows. From the East Wing, Pastor Warsame and Reverend Duale attempted to exit through a service corridor, not toward the youth being escorted to safety, but toward a gated access path at the rear of the compound. They did not speak. They did not protest. Their silence felt heavier than resistance. By 6:12 a.m., 31 individuals were detained for federal review. Medical teams comforted the youth, calm voices, slow reassurance, steady hands. Not a single young person was harmed. Not one was left behind. What unsettled investigators most was not the confrontation itself, but the structure behind it. Because nothing about the operation appeared improvised. It was organized, deliberate, practiced. A system hidden in plain sight. And for the first time, the sanctuary no longer resembled a place of faith. It resembled a corridor. The conflict that unfolded after the raid was not loud. It did not erupt in chaos or fury. Instead, it revealed itself in something far more unsettling: resistance shaped by paperwork, policy, and silence. Federal investigators would later describe it as a quiet war between truth and a system built to avoid being seen. Across 3 days of forensic review, analysts traced more than $196 million in program transfers routed through advisory boards, consulting partners, and faith exchange coordination offices. On paper, the payments were legitimate, labeled as risk evaluation, cross-border ministry support, and youth relocation logistics. In reality, nearly 44% of those transactions led to shell entities that existed only as digital signatures. Invoices were complete, authorizations were valid, but the programs behind them did not exist. The battlefield was not the campus, it was the infrastructure around it. Email archives revealed over 9,200 internal communications in which staff and contractors discussed efficiency targets, reduced inspection windows, and priority movement cases. The language was calm, professional, and procedural. No one spoke in terms of danger or wrongdoing. They spoke in terms of throughput. When junior administrators requested secondary verification for youth travel records, their inquiries were marked non-essential. When repeated departures occurred during the same late-night approval period, the anomaly was categorized as statistically insignificant. When a compliance officer questioned documentation inconsistencies, their role was reassigned within weeks. The resistance was not forceful, it was clinical, and that was what made it so difficult to break. Travel logs confirmed 56 cross-regional transfer approvals linked to ministry escort programs. Only 14 documented verified returns. The remaining 42 entries ended abruptly, without guardianship confirmation, academic re-entry, or housing reassignment. Their movement stopped on paper just as their lives disappeared from view. The deeper investigators went, the clearer the structure became. This was not disorder. It was precision. A network of licensing consultants, faith program auditors, and overseas coordination partners appeared across multiple files. The same names, the same approval stamps, the same routing language repeated over years. The individuals involved did not describe themselves as facilitators. They described themselves as protecting continuity. They were not acting with aggression. They were acting with confidence because the system had worked before. In one internal memorandum, stamped and archived, a directive read, Do not delay humanitarian throughput. That single phrase appeared 37 times across routing approvals tied to youth relocation cases, including those now confirmed as missing. The struggle that followed was not fought with weapons. It was fought with records, ledgers, timestamps, and signatures. A battle to separate compassion from convenience, policy from permission, care from control. And as investigators assembled the final chains of authorization, one realization stood above the rest. This network did not survive because it was hidden. It survived because too many people chose not to see it. By the end of the review period, more than $81 million in advisory and facilitation fees were frozen pending federal inquiry. Dozens of contracts were placed under suspension. Several compliance partners were reclassified as critical witnesses. The illusion of ministry protection had fractured, and what once appeared to be faith-based outreach now stood revealed as a machinery of movement, designed, approved, and defended through the quiet language of procedure. The true conflict was never on the ground. It was inside the system, and for the first time, that system could no longer defend itself with silence. The conflict that unfolded after the system was exposed did not look like a battlefield. There were no marching lines, no visible enemies, no cries of victory. Instead, it revealed itself in a way far more painful, through the quiet realization that entire lives had been moved, altered, and erased without leaving a trace behind. For investigators, this was the chapter that did not feel like investigation. It felt like grief. Across 3 federal review centers, case teams began reconstructing movement records tied to ministry-sponsored relocation programs. Out of 3,180 registered youth and young adults listed over a 5-year period, at least 2,540 had no full identity trail, no guardianship verification, no stable address history, and no documented return to any educational or welfare system. Their names appeared on departure lists, but their lives disappeared in the space between one line and the next. Some files contained only a first name. Others listed birthdays that did not match across forms. More than 780 profiles showed temporary identification codes that expired before their final recorded movement. They had been moved through doors that were never meant to close. The battle now was not against an organization. It was against absence. In the first review room, a federal child services specialist paused as she examined a roster sheet from the ministry's youth exchange wing. It listed 47 participants sent abroad during a single quarter, yet only 9 were ever recorded as entering a verified student or guardianship program afterward. The remaining 38 records ended in silence. No transfers, no medical updates, no return entries, only vanished pathways and blank spaces where history should have existed. Across another review desk, a separate team pieced together movements tied to faith mentorship relocations. 32 individuals were listed as having been resettled for spiritual support. When cross-checked against national databases, 0 re-entry confirmations appeared. It was not misplacement, it was disappearance. The human cost did not arrive as a number. It arrived as moments. A girl identified only by a travel wristband. A young man listed under 2 different names. A child's file with no recorded guardian, only a box marked pending. Many of the recovered youth spoke little. Some sat in silence. Others struggled to explain where they had been moved or why their identities changed from program to program. More than 140 individuals had been transferred through 3 or more locations, each move leaving fewer records than the one before it. Their journeys were not chaotic, they were structured, and structure was what made the tragedy so difficult to confront. Medical review teams reported dehydration, fatigue, and prolonged displacement in several cases. Yet the deepest wounds were not physical. They were the kind that left no visible mark, the disorientation of being shifted across systems where every document spoke on their behalf, but none of those documents protected them. In testimony logs, one recurring phrase appeared again and again. They told me it was only temporary. Temporary housing, temporary guardianship, temporary relocation, temporary until the records ended. When analysts reconstructed the full movement corridors, the realization came slowly, like a weight settling across the room. These children and young adults had not been misplaced. They had not slipped through cracks. They had been absorbed into a pipeline specifically designed to remove them from oversight. Every unanswered signature, every missing re-entry record, every altered identifier, they were not clerical errors, they were exits. By the end of the review cycle, 1,127 profiles were classified as high-risk displacement cases. Another 963 records required long-term identity reconstruction, assembling fragments of names, photographs, medical histories, and partial documents just to restore a traceable existence. This was not a crime measured in money or ledgers. It was a crime measured in absence. And the struggle now facing investigators was not how to prosecute a system. It was how to return names to lives that had been treated like movements on a schedule. For the first time since the operation began, no one in the briefing room spoke in procedural terms. There were no policy debates, no financial charts, no projections, only a quiet understanding. The most devastating battle in this case was not the one fought during the raid. It was the battle to bring back those who had been taken out of the world without ever being allowed to say they were here. By the time the investigation expanded beyond the ministry grounds, the case no longer felt like the exposure of a single organization. It began to feel like the slow unraveling of a structure that had been allowed to exist, not because it was invisible, but because too many people had chosen not to question it. The first widening review traced more than 118 international departure approvals issued across a 5-year span under faith exchange and youth relocation categories. Nearly every approval was processed during the same narrow administrative window, between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. hours, when routine verification procedures were most likely to be delayed. None of the approvals had been flagged. Not one had been denied. When analysts followed the chains of authorization, a larger picture emerged. Documents had passed through private compliance consultants, third-party risk assessment firms, and advisory offices contracted to support humanitarian mobility operations. Their signatures appeared again and again across travel exemptions, cargo waivers, housing relocation approvals. On paper, the work was professional, careful, procedural, efficient. In practice, it served one purpose. It prevented questions from being asked. Financial audits revealed more than $92.7 million in advisory and coordination fees paid across layered subsidiary accounts. Each transfer was labeled with language that sounded reassuring: infrastructure support, international continuity partnership, non-disruptive transition oversight. Yet when investigators contacted the listed partner entities, many had no staff rosters, no permanent offices, and no direct knowledge of the youth whose names justified the payments. The system had not broken. It had functioned exactly as it was designed. In one internal routing memorandum, preserved across multiple revisions, a directive appeared in clean, formal language: maintain priority movement status, avoid procedural interruption. That sentence repeated 43 times across approvals tied to relocation cases now classified as high risk. The resistance investigators faced was not emotional or defensive. It was administrative. Some officials explained that excessive scrutiny might delay mission output. Others insisted the programs were too culturally sensitive for intrusive review. Several testified that their role had been to support continuity, not to challenge documentation that had already been endorsed by other institutions. They did not see themselves as participants in harm. They saw themselves as maintaining stability. Across testimony logs, a painful pattern appeared. Whenever doubts surfaced, whenever a request for deeper verification arose, the response was not investigation, it was redirection. A new consultant was appointed, a different advisory office took over. The file was recategorized. Risk management became another word for silence. When investigators overlaid movement data with financial activity, the alignment became unmistakable. Of the 56 high-volume transfer corridors approved under ministry-affiliated programs, 38 were tied to the same group of licensing intermediaries and maritime coordination bodies. The same people, the same signatures, the same outcomes, and not once in 5 years had a single corridor been suspended. The shock did not come from a dramatic revelation. It came from the realization that the network had survived not in darkness, but within the space created by respectability. Boardrooms, review panels, administrative meetings, places where caution should have protected the vulnerable, yet instead protected the image of the institutions involved. When the final briefing concluded, 12 advisory contracts were frozen, 14 compliance entities placed under federal review, and more than $420 million in assets and operating reserves were secured pending inquiry. There were no press conferences, no declarations of victory. Inside the room, the tone remained quiet, measured, almost reverent, because the truth they now faced was heavier than the evidence itself. This network had not endured because it was hidden beneath the system. It had endured because it was allowed to operate inside the system, sustained by paperwork, protected by process, and upheld by people who believed that efficiency was safer than scrutiny. And for the first time, that belief was no longer seen as harmless. It was seen for what it truly was, a doorway. By the time the final reports were assembled, the investigation no longer felt like the conclusion of a single case. It felt like a reckoning, not only with the network that had been exposed, but with the culture of trust that had allowed it to breathe for so long. The evidence was no longer a matter of suspicion. It had become a record, permanent, undeniable, impossible to soften. Within the first 24 hours following the asset freezes, federal teams executed 17 coordinated search warrants across advisory offices, subsidiary program branches, and external coordination hubs. More than 14,000 internal documents were recovered, routing emails, financial approvals, revision drafts, and authorization exchanges that spanned nearly a decade of operational history. The language across those records was formal, careful, and restrained, but the outcomes were not. Grand jury proceedings were convened under sealed review. The preliminary charge range extended across human trafficking conspiracy, fraudulent humanitarian allocation, international transport racketeering, and obstruction of oversight procedures. 12 senior associates were reclassified as cooperating witnesses. 5 additional entities were placed under long-term federal monitoring. The numbers did not feel theoretical anymore. They felt personal. More than 1,127 displacement profiles now required identity reconstruction support. Social workers, legal officers, cultural liaisons, and trauma specialists working case by case, name by name, fragment by fragment. In many instances, it would take years, sometimes longer, to restore full documentation, guardianship clarity, and personal stability. Justice, investigators understood, would not arrive in a single ruling. It would arrive in time, slowly, carefully, patiently. Across institutional review panels, the tone was not angry. It was sober. Administrators who once praised the ministry's reputation now faced transcripts where their own approvals appeared beside vanished identities. Several testified that they had trusted prior authorizations. Others admitted that they feared disrupting valued partnerships. A painful truth rose through the testimony. No one believed they were enabling harm, but no one was willing to stop the system either. What emerged was not a narrative of villains operating in the shadows, but a chain of decisions shaped by convenience, reputation, and silence. At each step, someone chose not to look deeper. At each checkpoint, someone decided that procedure mattered more than presence. The reckoning, in that moment, no longer belonged to law enforcement. It belonged to every institution that had once called itself a guardian. Public announcements were not made. No victory speeches were delivered. Instead, policy boards initiated 8 structural audits, rewriting protocols for youth relocation programs, tightening approval hierarchies, and eliminating late-night waiver authority windows. Several agencies instituted a permanent rule: no humanitarian designation shall override verification. It was not dramatic, but it was irreversible. For survivors and displaced youth, the road forward would not be measured in reports or prosecutions. It would be measured in the restoration of identity, in the return of names to records, records to families, and families to a sense of belonging that had been taken from them without consent. The crime had never been only about movement. It had been about erasure. And as one federal analyst later wrote in a closing memorandum, the greatest danger was not the system itself. It was the belief that trust did not require oversight. That sentence would echo across every reform hearing that followed. By the time the final boxes were sealed, the silver dawn of illusion, the image of moral authority, faith respectability, and administrative confidence had faded. What remained was not outrage, nor triumph, nor condemnation. What remained was responsibility. Responsibility to question what appears benevolent. Responsibility to protect those who cannot speak for themselves. Responsibility to remember that compassion without scrutiny is not protection, it is permission, and the cost of that permission had been measured in lives. In the end, what had been uncovered was more than a criminal network. It was a lesson written in evidence, a reminder that trust, when left unquestioned, can become the quietest hiding place of all. The institutions that once stood with confidence now stood with humility. Not because the system had failed in silence, but because it had chosen silence over courage. Justice would continue in courtrooms and review panels, but the deeper work would live in years of restoration, restoring records, restoring dignity, restoring the simple truth that every life deserves to be seen. There were no celebrations, no triumphal words, only a quiet understanding shared by those who had walked through the investigation from beginning to end. Compassion must never replace accountability, and vigilance must never again arrive too late.